Hello and welcome. My name is Mary Johnson and I work for Joint Training. Some people might know me, some people might not have met me, but I train on Mental Capacity Act and DoLS predominantly. So I thought it might be quite useful to put some slides together for you around DoLS at this time and the considerations that we will be having to look at with COVID-19. So the Department of Health and Social Care came up with some guidance in April 2020 around deprivation of liberty safeguards and mental capacity at this time. So obviously we are in a different time, we're in a time of pandemic, so there are more restrictions around. But I suppose the very important thing is that the principles in the Mental Capacity Act, your 5 statutory principles of presuming capacity, supporting decision making, the person has a right to make unwise decisions as long as they understand. But if not, best interests and less restrictive practice still stand. So they are not superseded by the Coronavirus Act. They are still statutory principles and they are out there for us to follow at all times, alongside functionally looking at how the person is making that particular decision or choice at that time. So I've just picked out some important parts of the guidance that came out from the Department of Health and Social Care, some bits that I think might be quite useful to you in your settings and as managers. So paragraph 1 recognises that what they put in place, the Department of Health and Social Care in April, is emergency guidance. It is for all decision makers, so we will all be decision makers if we're supporting people who do not have capacity to make that decision or choice themselves. And we're caring for them. So it applies during the pandemic. I suppose the important message in that first paragraph is it should not become the new normal after the pandemic is over. So the principles continue, they always continue, but some of the parts in the guidance should not become the new normal way of working. Paragraph 2 recognises that we will be in situations at the moment where we will be making alterations to people's care. Now, lots of people will be able to consent to that, but for those people who don't have capacity to consent to changes in their best interest to provide treatment, to prevent them deteriorating, to move them to use better resources, to change their care plans, to change the activities that they're involved in, to prevent them from being infected. A lot of the time we'll be using best interest decision making to make sure that that's right for the individual person if they cannot be involved in that process. But if we've gone through supporting decision making and they can't be involved because they lack capacity, we'll be making those best interest decisions for people at this time. Paragraph 3 very clearly says, and this is a part of it that I like incredibly, that any decision made under the Mental Capacity Act should still be in relation to that individual person. So we cannot use the Mental Capacity Act to defend any decision that's made for a group of people. So we're back to actually looking at that person, their wishes, their needs, their choices at this time. It cannot be a blanket decision for a group of people. So paragraph 5 backs that up really nicely by saying it's crucial that we should seek consent on all aspects of care and treatment to which the person cannot consent, and we should try our best to get the feelings and wishes of the person, that person-centred way, and we should be looking to include other people who know that person well and would know what they would want or would have wanted at this time. Okay, decision makers in care homes then, we will be decision makers. We need to be taking appropriate proportionate approaches to situations. So we need to be putting things in place which are appropriate to the situation that we find the person in at this moment in time. In most cases, the changes to the person's care and treatment might fall under the existing deprivation of liberty that you have in place, the DoL, but in some cases you may very well need to look at having a new DoLS authorisation in place. So if we're putting more restrictions in place that are in place because the person lacks capacity to consent, they're not about the needs of a group, they're about the needs of the individual, and they're more restrictive or there's more restrictions in place, then we need to be making sure that we send that through for an authorisation. There is a shortened annex for that to happen. So an urgent authorisation we can send through and check out that actually what we're doing is lawful for that individual at this time. So the acid test then, so we all know the acid test is under continuous supervision and control and not free to leave. And we need to be making sure that some key points are considered within that acid test. So the first one that I've pulled out of the guidance is, does the person already have a DoL authorisation in place? Can we ask ourselves then, will the current authorisation cover new arrangements? Are the proposed arrangements more restrictive than the current authorisation? And if so, we should be looking at a review being carried out. And the current authorisation does not cover the new arrangements, that referral should be made to the supervisory body, to your local DoLS team, and then they will put an authorisation in place that replaces your existing authorisation. Okay, so a thought point for decision makers: we should avoid putting more restrictive measures in place for a person unless they're absolutely necessary to prevent harm to the person. DoLS cannot be used purely to support arrangements that are put purely in place to prevent harm to others. So it's not a public health issue, it's a deprivation of liberty for the best interest of that person at that time. And there's quite a nice bit of case law that I'm going to discuss at the end of this, which will bring that together very nicely. Okay. Differences on the guidance with contact from the DoLS team at the moment. Remote techniques are being used as far as is possible, but we can use current assessments to take evidence from on previous assessments, and if they're relevant and valid, that can actually inform the current assessment that's going to happen. Alternatively, if the assessment's been carried out in the last 12 months and it can be relied on, our question is there a need for a further assessment? Are there extra restrictions in place or not? So we need to check that out. We also need to look at end of life for people. And I suppose this is about that balance at end of life. Professional judgment comes into play here in a big way. Discuss with the supervisory body as to whether the authorisation is necessary. So it's about us having a balanced common sense approach, and I think the main thing which sit within paragraph 25 and 28 is, will this add any value to the person's care? Will this actually add any value to the quality of life, etc., at this point in time? So open to discussion, look at the restrictions, have those professional discussions. So a case that I kind of highlighted is a case that went to court the day before lockdown, but very much highlights the principles, the 5 principles of the Mental Capacity Act: presuming capacity, supporting decision making, unwise decisions, acting in somebody's best interest, and making sure it's the less restrictive way of doing it, and making sure it's really focused around the person. It also links into human rights articles. So Article 8 up there is the right to family and private life. And for this individual, it also links into the rights of individuals with disabilities. So the background is that BP lacks capacity to make decisions with regard to residence and care. So that's the choice or decision in this situation. The family have been divided as to whether they should live in a care home or receive a care package at home. They are in a care home at the moment, and they've had frequent visits from the family. We now know that due to coronavirus, there are extra restrictions on us, and some of the individual characteristics of BP are that the individual is deaf, they cannot use the telephone, they cannot use Skype to contact family. So obviously the restrictions start to become quite enormous for this individual. And we do need to measure health and safety and the safety of people, but we also need to look at how are we doing this in the best way possible. So an application went to court. It actually went through the daughter because the care home had made the decision to suspend visits from any family members because of coronavirus pandemic. So it was thought that this application was urgent because the imposed rights on this person, the imposed changes to the care could become an unlawful interference with the person's rights, and Article 5 and the European Court of Human Rights as well. So it went into court, and there was lots of discussion, obviously, that took place. But as part of that court process, there was a resolution. So the resolution is looking at VP's interests, best interests, and less restrictive practices, making sure the care home are meeting their obligations and doing things as safely as possible within the care plan, and also supporting the family to maintain contact and keep in touch with BP as much as is practically possible at this time. So the plan that ultimately came together at the end of this was this thing around, I suppose it's around supported decision making. There's a window of autonomy in this where we can educate BP, where we can look at what can somebody learn at this moment in time. So the conversations took place around BP actually being educated in the world of Skype, to creatively use communication boards to support the person to be able to communicate with family as far as possible, and to explore concurrent instant messaging. So, as BP got the ability to still read information, that instant messaging, or information that's coming in a different way. Additionally, the other things that the court said was actually the family can, by arrangement, visit. Obviously, we have the general restrictions for all of us where we're not able to go into the care home unless there's certain practicalities in place. But they could visit by looking through the bedroom window, by BP being on the ground floor, by waving through the window to them, by using the communication board to communicate two-way. All of this would require time, effort, and being quite creative. But it was felt by the court and subsequently by all parties that that was a mutual way to move forward and keep that contact, keep that communication, even though there are restrictions in place, the less restrictive options for the person. Okay, so this is a citing straight from the court, and the citing says that I am entirely satisfied that this is a balanced and proportionate way to respect BP's dignity and to keep BP at the centre of this plan. So that's the most important thing for us to hold on to here. The thing about being creative about DoLS and the conditions that we might put in place is really about thinking about what's the less restrictive option, what other things can we try, how can we keep this person's autonomy as much as possible, this person's contact as much as possible, even though we're needing to restrict people at this time if they lack capacity. So really the main message is using those main principles of the Mental Capacity Act to be creative about DoLS, to be creative about the conditions that we're sending through that people are open to at this moment in time. And then DoLS authorisations will be as person-centred as possible and as positive as possible for everybody involved. Okay, thank you very much for your time and listening. Here are some of the signpost sites that might be useful to you, including coronavirus, COVID-19, looking after people who lack mental capacity. If you need any extra information or you need to get in contact, please do.